So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 25th episode of 2023. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast, and our gold sponsor, Graybar. You know, we're just days away from NTI's allocation of the $42.45 billion BEAD funding to each of the states and territories. You know, some of the states are going to be the first off the starting line, as like Louisiana, Maine, Utah, and Ohio have already submitted their 5-year plans. We're looking forward to seeing other states follow suit, and we're anxious to see these states and territories announce the opening of their BEAD grant application windows. So really exciting times about to happen. Also today, we're holding our 4th Regional Fiber Connect workshop here in Lake Tahoe, California. You know, these regional fiber events have proven to have been wildly popular. And our next and final Regional Fiber Connect workshop will be in Minneapolis, the beautiful, warm city of Minneapolis, in October 24th. So you're not going to want to miss that. The registration will be opening soon. But next up for us is Fiber Connect 23 in Orlando on August 20 to 23rd. This is going to be the biggest and best broadband event, fiber broadband event in the world this year, with over 4,000 attendees and an amazing program. You know, the event's sold out the past 2 years in a row, and I anticipate the same, especially when we look at our registration is outpacing any year in history. So it's going to be a great event. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session with our good friend and strategic partner, Mike Render of RVA, who's going to discuss understanding the future of FTTH forecast. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us this morning. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, and our gold sponsor, Graybar. Now, if you'd all keep in mind that you're in listen mode only, you can ask a question at any time. You just need to type it into the question box in the control panel on the right side of your computer screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Do take a minute to do that. We really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we heard from Greg Williams of Prisvium on the trends in fiber cable, the top 3 trends in fiber optic cable. This was a great session as Greg outlined the strong demand growth for fiber optic cable and highlighted demand for bend-insensitive fiber. He also educated us on the benefits of 200 micron fiber and how it's backward compatible with the 250 micron fiber in the field today. So Greg is just a wealth of knowledge, and I always learn so much when I talk to him. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, we have the pleasure of hearing from our great friend and strategic partner, Mike Render of RVA, to discuss understanding the future FTTH forecasts. Mike is the CEO and principal analyst at RVA LLC, Market Research and Consulting. He's generally known as North America's premier market research expert in tracking fiber optic broadband deployment and consumer attitudes towards broadband. Mike's received numerous industry awards for his work in this area, and he's been a strategic research partner with FBA for the past 2 decades. Well, welcome, Mike. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go and work them into the Q&A at the end. With that, let's get things rolling. Put it over to Mike.
Great. Well, thank you, Gary, so much. Yeah, today we want to talk about the forecast and for this coming year and the next 5 years, and really how all the diverse types of players we have in the fiber to home space are contributing to that forecast. Next slide. There, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the drivers, what the momentum has been, what the forecast is in general terms, and then the different players and how they fit in. And finally, a little bit about what their these different large versus small players pitch as far as BEAD money coming up may be. Next slide. So this slide, some of you have seen this before, but I want to touch on it briefly. You know, we do a survey every year. The Fiber Broadband Association has sponsored this since 2007. So one of the longest running general internet surveys out there. We ask people about all kinds of internet use and ask them about how it's impacted their lives and so forth. But one of the things we do uniquely is take a speed test and a latency test during the survey. So that makes it a random survey of what's really happening out there. You know, Ookla speed test data is good and so forth, but it is somewhat biased in that people with better broadband tend to take surveys, these speed tests more often and so forth. So this gives us a randomized basis. It's also very real world in that it you know, does have the Wi-Fi, does have going out and coming back. So it's just an average real world look at these different technologies. Well, what you can see here is in every single category, fiber to the home beats the other methods of delivery. You know, whether it's upload speed, download speed, cost per megabits, excuse me, the reported outages, the net promoter scores, latency, all these things are important. Fiber is number one in every case. Cable is, I think, number two in every case, with the second best method of delivery. And then it goes on down the chain to things like wireless and DSL. But clearly, the reasons this is happening at the base is that fiber is just better. It's proven to be better in every way. And this is even with some constraints. We know that when we're doing speed tests, they are constrained by Wi-Fi devices and so forth. So the higher performing methods tend to be handicapped more than the lower performances. So on average, the speeds are higher, for example. Also keep in mind that this takes into account what people actually sign up for. Even when a gig is available, not everyone takes a gig, so that influences that. But in every case, it's better for fiber. Next slide. Just wanted to talk a little bit about momentum. Here we can see the history of fiber deployment on an annualized basis. You know, when I started helping track this back in 2002, you know, we were adding like 25,000 households a year, and now we're up to 7.9 million in 2022. So just great progress. Some ups and downs for various reasons we've talked about before, but we're really going to focus on the future forecast for the next 5 years and even decade. So next slide. So here we'll talk a little bit about the forecast. And you know, we do a forecast every year of fiber. We do this based on looking at what people have publicly announced versus what they want to do. We do surveys, we do some statistical analysis and different things to try to get to a forecast. And here you can see the generalized track of the forecast. These are basically 5-year periods. You can see a little longer than 5 years, 8 million pre-2008, 11 million, 17 million, 32 million the last 5 years. And now we're predicting 56 million. So huge impact, by far the biggest build coming up in the next 5 years. We've constrained this a little bit. You know, we're assuming, first of all, that some people can over project a little bit, over announce. You know, one thing that's interesting I've seen in my career is in the early days, it wasn't cool to say you were building fiber. You know, Verizon was out on a limb and they actually got hammered a bit on their stock because people thought, why are you spending all this money unnecessarily? You know, DSL is going to be great for many years, et cetera, et cetera. And so it wasn't as easy to do that. Now it is positive to say you're building fiber. So all these providers tend to say, yes, we're going to build such and such. Sometimes they have to back off that a little bit. So we had already calculated, you know, maybe 10 million in there that was over said, especially this is hitting in 2023 somewhat, but going on out in future years. We're also assuming some constraints probably in labor. The material constraints seem to be generally being taken care of. People are stepping to the plate, building many new plants, multiple plants for duct, for fiber cable, for fiber itself, for the enclosures, everything. So, there could be a weak link somewhere, but generally looks taken care of. Labor could be a constraint. So if you look at the raw numbers, what people said they would build, it's about 76 million. So we're being a little bit conservative from that. Now, we're assuming there's no catastrophes from the economy, no new world wars, no depression, those kinds of things. But and of course, there can be minor dips in things over the time. But we're very bullish on the next 5 years and even into the 10 years beyond, the 5 years beyond that. One thing that many people do is underestimate the amount of fiber out there because they might be projecting only one fiber, only in affluent areas, et cetera. And that's just not the case. Fiber needs to go everywhere. People have seen the benefit of that in lower income areas, and rural areas. And we also are seeing that in more dense affluent areas, you're often seeing 2 fibers to the home, sometimes 3, and that really makes sense. So we're seeing a projection on out for very strong growth for the next really 10 years at least. And then some other things will come into play that'll probably extend that as well. But very bullish on this forecast. Next slide. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about the different players involved. One thing some people miss, especially on the equity side, they're the people covering public companies. They just don't tend to believe that these smaller players have been involved, or why would they get involved? This takes money. Why is this? And what I want to go through is why all these different players are important and what they're adding. Tier 2, and especially Tier 3 telephone companies were really the first of the game. There's 630 or so of them building right now, about over 8 million homes passed, very high take rates. Really, they pioneered overbuilding of fiber to the home. And you might say, why? Really, they had to. It wasn't to get a better internal rate of return or anything like that. It was really internal rate of survival. All of a sudden the game changed from giving just telephone over twisted pair copper to triple play, the video and the internet. And their old twisted pair, especially that was corroded and long distance, just wasn't going to do it anymore. And they quickly came to the conclusion that going to fiber was the best way to do that. So they really started overbuilding, and they had to, and that really helped this worldwide movement to fiber to the home start. Next slide. Municipalities got in fairly early too, some of them. There's only about 90 involved. There's some political opposition and so forth, and it's more difficult because they don't have as much experience in telecom. But they've been very significant in starting to prove the scale back in 2002, 2003. Their goals are to provide economic development, smart grid, but they were significant to the history and will be somewhat significant going forward. And some are just done tremendously well. EPB, for example, is a fairly large municipal, which against 2 major incumbents has over a 70% share. So they've done extremely well in some cases. Next slide. Next slide. So the next one is alternative or competitive providers. They got involved fairly early. Also, just seeing an opportunity. They may have been a wireless providers that realized, this isn't going to work for the long term. We need to start building fiber. They might be just someone coming in seeing opportunity. The big one, of course, was Google in 2010, both coming in trying to find a good way to invest money. in the space that they were somewhat involved in, but also helping improve internet overall by spurring other people to build, which they did. They helped spur some of the incumbents to really get involved in a bigger way. And their take rate has been very good. About 6 million passed overall from that group. Next slide. And then, of course, the large tier 1 telcos got involved. Verizon was first. After the Fiber Broadband Association helped the FCC make some changes to policy, they jumped in a big way and really proved the idea of large scale builds. And of course, their driver was, DSL was just proving to be insufficient by that time, and they were starting to bleed customers. They really saw the writing on the wall that they needed to do something different. And so, of course, that was a big move in the overall drive to everyone starting to get fiber. Next slide. And then, of course, the smaller cable companies started to get involved. At least the more quality ones saw that they really needed to do something different. They decided to bypass all the new versions of DOCSIS and just upgrade the plant. And they've been involved for some time. Over 1 million homes of these smaller, mid-sized cable companies have played a role. Next slide. And then you've got rural telcos, or I'm sorry, rural electric co-ops. These very rural entities started to see back in about 2013 that this was another opportunity for them to serve their customers, created a second product for them. They also have the opportunity to smart grid. Second product may be important in the future as they get more competition from rooftop solar and so forth, but they've done a great job in starting to fill in that very rural area. Only about 1 million homes passed so far, but a lot of those are still just starting to get into the game. And of course, we'll be looking to federal money to help in these very low density areas as well. Next slide. And finally, the tier 1 MSOs have started to build. You've got about 8 entities they're building somewhat. The top 2 are being pretty slow to the game, trying to rely on DOCSIS 4.0, but coming up and thinking that will fill the game. So far in my experience, all of those promises of trying to beef up an older technology helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. And hopefully they won't be too late to the game. But they're starting to see competition in fiber areas. So some of these are starting to build. In fact, it looks like my first fiber provider in a kind of an ex-urban area will be Cox, a cable company. So I'm supposed to get service in about 2 months. So they're starting to get involved in a bigger way. And this, of course, will help bring competition to the market in fiber competition. You're going to see more and more places with 2 fibers to various places. Next slide. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the pitch. All this BEAD money going out there is going to be looked at from the state entities and from consultants and so forth in terms of who should we go with. The larger providers, the tier 1 telcos, the MSOs, their pitch may be, we've got proven ability to build at a very large scale. We've got the staff for reporting requirements, the accountants and the lawyers. This gives you fewer entities to deal with. We can build more in a larger area. On the other hand, the pitch of the smaller providers might be more expertise in rural areas, whereas the tier 1s have largely, with a few exceptions, ignored rural areas. They have actually had experience in getting involved in building. They own right-of-way and poles in many cases, especially things like the RECs. Many have said they have workforce attraction advantages. When they put out their sign that they need workforce, they get workforce in because people see that as an opportunity for a quality place to work. And of course, there's some could say incentive for ongoing OpEx excellence. The people that are focused on rural areas tend to look there first. For example, I'm on a rural electric co-op for my electricity. Some not far away are on a tier 1, you might say, electric company, public company. Obviously, the public company, if there's an ice storm or a tornado, are going to tend to, for right reasons, want to fix the urban setting first before they get to the rural areas where that's not the case for smaller providers. So all in all, there's other reasons, but there's going to be some different points that these different entities are going to make. And, it's not for me to judge, but obviously people that are making these decisions need to think carefully about the best choices for building in their states. And of course, it could be a mix of all these things, but all these players have been and will be very important to the build, the unprecedented build in the next 5 years and beyond. And that's my publication, my presentation, Gary. So let's go
Mike,
from there.
always great stuff. I got a bunch of questions here for you.
Sure.
Let's start with Trish. Go back to the earlier slide there with the forecast on it. So what do we do about 7.1 more back? Go back one more. That one. Yeah, we did about what 7.9 million homes passed last year. Right. So first of all, explain the dip from the 7.2. That's a COVID dip.
COVID dip, and also was just a drop in AT&T, who was very important at that time, especially that important, because there weren't as many other large players building. So that came into play. The COVID situation came into play. And then it just came right back with AT&T building again. They had finished a build in 2019 that the FCC had kind of helped negotiate. If they did the DirecTV deal, they would also build fiber. And so they finished that original.
Yeah, for the AT&T merger with DirecTV.
Right. But by that time, they'd fully realized the need to continue on, but I think they needed to step back and analyze how they were going to go forward. So there was a dip there, and then COVID as well.
But you're predicting what, about 9 million for 2023?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it's more like 8.5. So it's not a huge gain, but it still is an uptick, right?
Well, pretty significant. So help me explain what's going on with the market right now, because all our suppliers. So Fiber Broadband Association, half our members are ISPs, the other half are the supply side, and the supply side is what is going on? Why all of a sudden we went from 52-week lead times to now the orders have stopped, paused for a little bit. So what's going on there?
Well, of course, one reason for the lead times going down is just more supply, of course, and that now they've been able to build up their supplies and have a better supply to meet demand. But the other thing that happened, and we've seen this various times in the market, is when people see there's a shortage, which there were shortages last year and the year before, of duct and fiber, and sometimes people had to cast their own enclosures out of concrete because they couldn't get them and things like that. They started buying ahead basically and inventorying product, and you might say hoarding, but it was a good business decision. They didn't want to stop their build because they didn't have material, so they started buying more than they needed. Well, now as things have started to catch up, they've realized, hey, maybe we don't need that the next order is quite as quick as we did before. And in talking to suppliers, most of them understand that is the case. It's not the underlying build that's down. Yes, some people have reduced their build a little bit in 2023. AT&T's taking somewhat of a dip for a year, but overall, everyone we've talked to on the deployment side, be it contractors, be it engineers, says, it's gonna be a good year. Now, it's not going to be as much of a step up as we'll see in, say, 2024, but with the BEAD money coming on board and so forth, but still a very good year.
Yeah, I mean, if we get to 8.5, I mean, if you look at the previous peak, 7.2 to 7.9, so getting to, that's just as big a gap going to 8.5. Right. So it's 2023 looks to be a great year from a deployment perspective. And then you're saying 2024 and beyond is just going to keep rocking.
Right. Yeah, and we may have some constraints. No one really knows if we have, the Fiber Broadband Association doing a great job in trying to help, and others are helping build the labor supply. But can we get to 11 million, 12 million per year? How far can we go? And so there may be some cap kind of leveling off, not because of demand, but because of labor supply possibly.
All right, so you kind of outlined the different segments between the tier ones, the tier twos, the cable guys, the rural electric co-ops, municipalities, the overbuilders, and so forth. All right, with all this money coming out, who are going to be the winners? I mean, who's going to get the money? What's
Well, that's kind of, yeah, that's a good question, and that's kind of what I was pointing to in the last slide. Is no one really knows. I don't know at this point. Obviously, I've heard people say I'm going with, some people think more people will go with some of the larger providers because, it's easier to deal with one provider, et cetera, some of the points I made. But others say, I really want to make sure that people that really understand our state, our rural area are going to get the money. So I think it's going to be a good mix. I don't know exactly how that's going to come out. I unfortunately can't make a good forecast in that case.
Well, it looks like, with the state broadband grants, cable has done a fantastic job of winning those with fiber, right? I mean, like we've seen all the smaller cable guys have switched to fiber to the home, and the big guys seem to be definitely putting fiber to the home for winning these state bids, these state grants. And then it seems like, they've always done fiber to the home for new builds, greenfield, but
Right.
it seems like that they are being very aggressive. Even the biggest are being aggressive in anywhere there's competition, they need to put fiber to the home. Is that what you're seeing? Like I just saw one of the cable companies announced their big 10G and the big fiber deployment was announced the other day.
Yeah, I think cable companies are seeing the opportunity, and actually, this is just a theory, but they're proud of their high market share, which isn't quite as high as some people predict, only looking at the public company numbers, but they're starting to see that dwindle a bit. So one way to help keep that short is to go beyond, not only try to keep your market share up by starting to do fiber and do other things to try to keep your share, but build in new areas to try to get new customers. So that's an opportunity. But people like rural electrics, they're thinking about this in a big way because they see the need and the opportunity and have polls and they'd like to get involved. Then of course, rural telcos who, there's been a lot of them built, but there's still ones that have not, and they're realizing it's time to get in, and they're edging out. They built their town, for example, and now they see the opportunity to edge out into rural areas. So there are a lot of people with the opportunity to build, the motivation to build, the desire to build, and so it will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I was surprised, so there's what, 900 rural electric co-ops out there. And my impression there was 200 that had broadband, and getting there is about another 50 that were
I think.
adding.
Yeah, 250.
Our numbers are the same, but you said that you had like about 100 that were actually have broadband networks. So it's.
Yeah, I think that was about the number that actually can report, numbers, but there's about 250 that have already announced they're in the process or starting to build. And in talking to some of them, that will grow beyond that, but it probably won't go to 900. There are some of them who just think, I've been in the electric business for 100 years and that's what I want to stay at,
That's crazy. I can't imagine any scenario where a rural electric co-op wouldn't want to go ahead and just provide broadband to their community, unless for some reason they're served, which,
Right.
they're not usually communities.
I happened to come across a pamphlet from 1935 from the rural electric trying to sell customers, and it said, "Power and light for the future. This is going to change the resident," and it showed a guy with labor-saving devices on the farm, and it's going to change the world. Well, that same message is true for fiber, the power of light for fiber. So there are certainly people that get that out there, and they're seeing the opportunity, and
Well,
they want to do.
I love going to lunch with the general manager of a rural electric co-op, because you walk in and every single person in the restaurant has to make a comment to them, so they've seen them at church or at the ball game, or they, so they know everybody. Right. And so that's to me the definition of accountability, when everybody knows who you are, where you live,
Right.
and has an opinion about the service they're getting from you. So
Yeah,
those
exactly.
guys definitely are very accountable to their community.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and it's same for small telcos as well. That's part of their message is they're local and you can get to the decision maker. And when you call, you're going to talk to somebody with a South Alabama accent or whatever. And you know, that's part of their value proposition, you might say.
That's right. You got to deliver exceptional service if you're going to be seeing everybody in church on Sunday. So
That's right. That's right.
all right, well, Mike, we always appreciate talking with you, and you've been a great strategic research partner for FBA for over 2 decades. So thank you for that, and we appreciate everything that you and RVA does for our industry. So thanks everybody for getting together today, and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday for Fiber Breakfast. We're going to be talking to Seamus Dowd, the Associate Legislative Director for the Telecommunications and Technology of the National Associations of Counties, NACO. So please join us next Wednesday, and we'll hear what NACO has to talk about broadband. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.